Let's look at extinction. When something goes extinct, that's forever. There's no coming back. So why are some species more likely to go extinct than others? Why are they more vulnerable to extinction? In these past 5 mass extinctions and our current 6th that we're in now, why do some species go and others not? Like, what are some factors that control that? And that's what we're going to look at within this PowerPoint. Usually, the most vulnerable species are going to be affected in more than one way. So let's look at this. So species can have a narrow geographic range, meaning they're just not found in very big of an area. In Kentucky, within the Barren River and Green River systems, we have these two animals, the bottlebrush crayfish and the orange fin darter. The only place on Earth that they live are in these 2 rivers. So if something were to happen, say like a large toxic sludge spill into the river or something, and it killed them all, then they would be extinct. They wouldn't be able to recolonize from some other area because that's the only areas they live in. So species that have a narrow geographic range are often vulnerable to extinction just because, they're in a small area. But if it was a really small area and a bulldozer drove over them, well, then they're gone. So having a small geographic range puts you at risk for extinction. If you only have one or very few populations, this can put you at risk for extinction. So this little mouse, so cute, it's called the Perdido Key Beach mouse. And they have very few populations left. It used to be all along the coast of Florida up near Pensacola, living on beaches. But due to beach development, because people like to go to the beach and drink their Coronas and sit back under umbrellas and get sandy, we've destroyed much of the habitat for the species. So now its range is really shrink and the populations are really low in number. There is on Perdido Key, which is a little island off the coast of Pensacola, Florida, there's a protected area preserved for this mouse, but if, say, a hurricane comes through, wipes out that island and wipes out that population, the species could go extinct. So having small population sizes with only one or few populations makes you at risk. So another case for this are large African mammals. So like the cheetah and the rhinos, the Javan rhinos, these guys are have a really small population size, and the cheetahs have a fairly small population size, but what has happened in the past, they had an even smaller population size, such that now they're all genetically very similar to one another, causing them to not have a diverse gene pool. And so because of that, say an infection comes through or something happens, they're not going to be able to adapt as well because they don't have the genetic diversity in place in their population. So it puts them at risk for extinction. We as humans are really good at killing stuff. That's going to be our claim to fame, is that, we wiped out things. Maybe we can turn that around and not destroy the planet. But at our current, things will have to change. At our current consumption rate of natural resources and population growth rate, we're going to destroy everything probably. So it would be better if we could keep the planet so that we could live on it, right? That would be ideal. So that's kind of what conservation biology is about. But things that we hunt or harvest, often we kill a lot of them because we're good at killing stuff. So for instance, the Atlantic cod. This fish used to number in the trillions in the Atlantic Ocean. And you can still buy cod sandwiches and things. But due to overfishing, the species is listed as vulnerable because their population, it's something like 12% of its historic highs. So we've way overfished Atlantic cod. Another example of this are rhinoceros, right? So like the white rhinos, I believe just recently the last male white rhino died in captivity, so that species is now going to go extinct. And the black rhinos are critically endangered also. It's all because their horns, which is a giant toenail. It's made out of keratin, the same thing your hair and fingernails are made out of. But in Asian cultures, in some of them, they have this really wacko belief that rhino horn cures things, like it cures erectile dysfunction and things. And so their horns are very valuable on the black market to be sold to Asian cultures for folk medicine and folk remedies. And so because of that, rhinos are now going extinct. If you're a species that is big and tasty, odds are people killed you. And so species that are large-bodied or need, or need large home ranges, but usually if you have a big body, you got to have a big home range to be able to eat enough grass and that sort of thing to sustain yourself. People are usually going to eat you. So if we look at North America and Australia here, the way this graph works is we look at number of species on the y-axis. On the x-axis, we have their body size, mass in kilograms. So how big are they? Okay, so this is big stuff. This is little stuff. This is still pretty small, like possum, coon size stuff in here. Okay, so red means you've gone extinct, and green means you're still living. So if we look at both North America and Australia, most of the big stuff is gone. It's extinct. It's dead. We killed them. Like the woolly mammoth and the Tasmanian tiger. Both species are now extinct due to people hunting them. And some things you might not think about, something as small as a little turtle. The box turtle, these guys, for their body size, need relatively large home ranges. Their home range needs to be about the size of 3 football fields. But if you look at the Midwestern U.S., like if you've ever driven through Iowa or Nebraska, it's just corn, pretty much, the whole thing. And so because of this increase in agriculture and increase in development, cities are increasing in size, suburbs are increasing. We've now fragmented their habitats, and these little guys don't do so good when they got to cross a blacktop road and get hit by a car. So we're seeing declines in their population numbers in the Midwest, like Ohio, Indiana, and other areas. If you have to move a long way, it puts you at a greater risk for extinction. So things that migrate seasonally, like salmon. So salmon, they're born in rivers, then they swim. They might live a year or so in the river, some species do. And then they go out to the ocean and spend a few years, and then they come back to reproduce in the same river where they were born. And so this movement, the fact that they got to move between the river and the ocean, increases their risk of extinction. Because of this, because of dams. Because to go over a dam as a little fish, it's pretty easy, just ride the slide and go down. But then as the adult coming back to spawn, when you try to come back upstream, you're stuck. You can't cross over top of the dam, and so you can't go upstream. And this creates a major barrier for seasonal migrants, and some rivers now have in place things called fish ladders to help with this. But even those aren't perfect. And we see dams being the number one thing that causes salmon populations to decline, is not being able to get back upstream. Overfishing also hurts salmon, but development of the rivers is a big problem, right? Another thing that migrates, these little cerulean warblers. They're a little pretty blue bird that lives in the eastern U.S. In the summer, they're here in Kentucky breeding, like they nest and hang out here in the woods. But they migrate all the way down to South America. And so in this map here, everything that's yellow is where they migrate through, right? They're a tiny little bird. They can't fly across the Gulf of Mexico, so they got to go down here and stay over land so they can get food and water and stuff as they go down. So they migrate down through here down through Central America, down through Central America. Then they get to South America, they spend the winters here, and they come back up in the summers. And so it takes all the cooperation of all these countries to make sure that this little tiny songbird that is building a nest in a tree in Kentucky woods survives. And if anything happened to the habitat they need en route through any of these places, it could have major consequences for them. Another thing that will increase the odds of extinction of a species is if you can't disperse very well. If you produce seeds or offspring that you can't move anywhere, then it's going to be issues. Some species are really good at dispersal, like zebra mussels. Zebra mussels are an invasive species. They're not native to the U.S. They're really good at dispersing. So pretty much every waterway in the U.S. that's freshwater now has these things living in it. And since they're really good dispersers, because what happens is their larval form just lives in the water. It's just free floating in the water. And so they don't need what's called an intermediate host. Versus our native mussels, all the mussels that are native require an intermediate host, and it's almost always very specific host. Like some mussels only attach themselves to the gills of salamanders, and other mussels only attach themselves to the gills of a certain species of fish in the larval form to get dispersed. And so this really intricate, co-evolved dispersal of our native mussels makes them not very good at dispersing, because let's say something happens and all those salamanders gets killed. Well, now you don't have anything to move your larvae around, so you can't disperse. So because of that, our freshwater mussels in the U.S. are the most endangered group of organisms we have. Almost all species are going to be threatened or endangered. And it doesn't help that they now have invasive species like zebra mussels and even Asian carp. They eat the same food as our native mussels, and so now they're competing. They've got strong competitors for their food and space. Another look at effective dispersal is when Europeans came to North America, they brought smallpox with them. Europeans had evolved with the virus smallpox, and so you would get it, it'd be like chickenpox, it'd make you sick, you'd get better. But the native South and North Americans had no immunity to this virus, and so it wiped out most of the population of the continent when they came. On this note, before we change, our current system of agriculture is such that we grow thousands of acres of clones. They're genetically, identical, or at least very, very similar hybrid crops, such that if a pathogen like late blight were to get a foothold, it could wipe out the U.S. corn and soybean industry. Just as a heads up on that. Something else that causes you to have an increased likelihood of extinction is if you have a really specialized niche. And remember that a niche is a species' functional role in its environment. Some ecologists define it as an nth dimensional hypervolume. But we're going to go with functional role in environment. What you do, where you live, how you act with other stuff, and that kind of thing. So things that are really specialized niche, like a koala bear. Koalas are so cute and cuddly, right? I mean, I don't know. It might gnaw your arm off. I've never tried to pet a koala, but they look cute. And they live in eucalyptus trees, and they only eat the leaves of eucalyptus trees. So their niche is highly specialized. If something were to happen to those eucalyptus trees, then all the koalas would go extinct also. Many aquatic plants live in wetlands, and you won't see the same plants in different wetlands. There's exceptions to that, like cattails. Cattails are kind of ubiquitous, cosmopolitan, very weedy kind of things, but a lot of wetland plants require really specific water depths, pH, temperature, etc. To survive. So the conditions have to be just right. So if suddenly you dig a ditch in the wetland to drain some of the water, now the depth has changed, and now maybe that species can't survive. Or let's say you start farming near it and you got cow poop running into it, it's going to change it, and now they can't survive. And so there's just lots of things. Acid rain starts happening, changes the pH. So many of these wetland plants have very specific requirements, and if altered, they are at a higher risk for extinction because it's easy to alter those things. Vernal pools are like temporary ponds, and we have a lot of these, in the woods around here in Kentucky, and many species of amphibians require these to breed. So you think salamanders and frogs in the woods in Kentucky, like these pictures here, these are all species that live here in Kentucky. They're hanging out, but when they make tadpoles and babies, they got to have water. They got to have a pond. And a pond that's permanent is not a good thing because fish start living in it, and then the fish eat them when they're babies. So they want a pond that's wet in the springtime, because if you've been to Kentucky, in the winter and in the early spring, it's really wet here. We get a lot of water, soils become saturated, so we get these wetlands, and they live in them. And then they lay their eggs, they mature, they come back out on land, and then say by August, the pond is dried up. And so that's what a temporary pool or vernal pool. And if you require that, if you don't get that temporary wetland every year, then you're not going to be able to complete your life cycle and reproduce. So things with specialized niches are more likely to go extinct. Another thing that increases your vulnerability to extinction is kind of a measure of, you can sort of think of it as your toughness. So if you're used to sitting in an air-conditioned office that's the same temperature, in the winter it's got heat, in the summer it's got AC, same exact temperature all the time, and then suddenly you're like, okay, here's a t-shirt, and it's 103 degrees, you got to walk 5 miles, it's going to be pretty hard, right? And so a lot of species experience a similar reality. If they live in an environment that's characteristically really stable and pristine, meaning not a lot of human intervention yet. And the two examples of this are tropical rainforest and coral reefs. They don't have a lot of disturbance. Trees do fall, but there's not like logging and roads and a lot of that. And so if something comes in and creates disturbance and makes the environment less stable, often these species aren't able to cope. Like in a rainforest, if you come in and log that rainforest, and you cut down all the trees, it's going to allow tremendous amounts of sunlight to touch the ground as opposed to what used to be there. It's going to dry out the soil and possibly turn it into a desert, and it's not going to rain again. So it'll never come back to a rainforest. You've completely altered the state. And we see this happening around the world a lot because these rainforests are so big, so vast, so wet, they create their own climate. And when you cut them down, you change the climate that they're creating, and so the species that were there can't come back, and so they go extinct. It's all, you hear the saying, there's strength in numbers, right? Well, there's strength in numbers, except when people want to kill you. And then when that's the case, it's not so much. So I have this little bird called the passenger pigeon. And these birds used to number in the billions in the United States, with a B, billions in the United States. And in the fall, they were migratory. They would flock together in massive numbers. There'd be flocks of tens of thousands of birds, maybe hundreds of thousands that would flock together. And so it was a common thing for people they ate them some, but it was also just for sport to just stand on the hillside and shoot them when they flew over. Well, and this is why, if you're into firearms, really fancy shotguns will be called a pigeon grade. And they're still called that because back in the day, that was a sport. People would shoot these passenger pigeons. But since we shot them, they're now extinct because we killed them. So, go us. The American buffalo / bison. So the American bison, we hunted these to near extinction, and it was easy to do because they hang out in herds. You find one, you find all of them in an area. They're not dispersed, spread out. So once you find them, you found all of them that are going to be in that area. And so we hunted these for sport and for market hunting. We used some of their organs and stuff, but then often they were just killed so that Native Americans wouldn't have food or shelter. So it was, like a terrible part of American history here. But we almost killed them all because they like to hang out together and they were easy to find. Um, Luckily, we still have a few of these guys left. Bats. So this is a picture of the Indiana bat. Um, and these little guys, they like to roost together in caves, especially in the winter. They hibernate, and they get in these huge flocks, that used to number in millions, and hibernate together. Well, this act of roosting together puts them at greater risk. And so now there's a fungus called white nose syndrome that's in these caves that, since all the bats are hanging out together, the fungus gets on one bat and spreads to all the other bats, and then they all die. And also, just for people, there have been cases of, in the winter, stupid people going in and just smashing hundreds of thousands of bats hanging on caves in the wintertime. So this is another consequence of forming these other permanent or temporary aggregations, meaning you hang out with a lot of other members of your species. So that's going to put you at a greater risk from disease in the case of the bats, or from human pressures in the pigeons and the bison. If you've never encountered people, you don't know to be afraid of them, because again, people kill stuff. And so if you're a species that evolved somewhere that humans did not, then you don't know to be afraid of them. That's the case of the dodo bird. This little guy, we've got some stuffed ones from back in the 1700s, but the dodo birds lived on this island called Mauritius, and they were big, like the size of a turkey. They couldn't fly. They just walked around. They lived on an island with no big predators, so they were top dog on their island. Well, people showed up and were like, hey, look, there's a turkey. And it just walks up to you because it's not afraid, and you just smash it in the head with a stick. And so because of their non-fear of humans, people were able to easily kill them. And it was sailors would just stop their ship for a day or two, go club a bunch of dodos, throw them on the boat, and then continue on. And because of those practices, the dodos finally went extinct because they weren't afraid of people, and they would just come up to you even though, people bashed them in the head with a stick. So we've talked a little bit about having a small population with the rats. The Perdido mice. And so what is a population, right? So a population is going to be a group of the same species that are living in the same area at the same time. That's a definition of population. So like if we look at lakes and we look at the fish in here, so this would be a population of fish, population of fish, population of fish. And so in some cases, like in these lakes, it's going to be really difficult for gene flow, aka mating, to go from one population to another, because fish can't walk on land, so these fish can only breed with each other, but they can't go over here to Lake C and breed with them. So that's going to increase their vulnerability for extinction if they have a small population there. But other times we can have different populations, like here and here, big mountain in the middle, and there's still some gene flow that can go between them. So let's take these flowers. Let's say this is a flower, and these probably are going to get pollinated by each other, right? Because there's a whole bunch here beside each other that are probably going to get pollinated. But they could have pollen blow on the wind, so it's a wind-pollinated flower. Pollen could blow on the wind, blow around this mountain, over the mountain, through the mountain, and come over here and pollinate these flowers, or vice versa, right? So some gene flow probably is still occurring between these two populations, but not as much as is occurring within them. Right, so these, are they still one population, or are they two populations, right? Because same species, same area, same time. Well, these are different areas, but they're still kind of working together, right? So that gives us this idea of metapopulations. So in these three examples here, so we've got three completely independent populations in this example here. So there's no gene flow between them in example A. Example B, we got gene flow between these two, and between these two. So simple interactions. Example C is more what we usually see, and you'll have a core population, maybe this is habitat that's bigger, better, more stable, something where the species evolved originally. I mean, there's a lot of variables here, but you got this large core population, and then we've got satellite populations, and you've got gene flow amongst them. These arrows represent kind of the amount of gene flow, right? So we've got a little bit of gene flow going to this population because it's really far away, and we've got a whole lot of gene flow going to these two little populations because they're closer. And so in this one, we get more complex. We're like, we got this and this. We got a lot more gene flow going on amongst populations, right? And so this metapopulation idea is that we've got a subpopulation from an overall in a given area and whose members interbreed, right? So generally members will breed amongst the metapopulation and gene flow occurs between patches. So that's a metapopulation. So we'll have a core, we'll have satellite populations. Maybe you've got a satellite population that's in a good spot, so there are going to be a lot of them. Maybe you got satellite populations in somebody's backyard and they're about to get mowed. All right, so maybe this is a bad spot. This is a good spot, but you know. So the smaller the population, the less stable it's going to be. And a real life example of this are Rocky Mountain sheep. Okay, so we look here in California. So this is a little part of California. And we've got where red is, this is going to be core populations of sheep. So here's red. They're mountain, right? These things live in the mountains, right? And so it's kind of like desert with mountains in it, is what this is. And so they're hanging out up here in the mountains. And orange are going to be historic places where they used to live, but now they're extirpated, or it's places maybe they migrate. So like here, 35, this is population 35, and then this orange thing. So let's say maybe these mountains are really tall, like really big tall mountains, and it gets really cold in the winter, and these mountains are like better in the winter. So they come over here in the winter, and then they go back here in the summer, or something like that, right? So that could be happening there. Purple are going to be where they've been reintroduced. And yellow are going to be where they've naturally recolonized on their own. And so you see these arrows indicating gene flow amongst populations, right? So we got all these arrows, gene flow amongst them. And so this is a real life metapopulation of sheep out in California. With these populations, we can do what's called a population viability analysis. Now, there's some, well, first let's talk about what it is, and we'll talk about the problem with it. All right. So within populations, you've got what's called the minimum viable population. So that's like how many individuals are needed for this species to continue to survive. And with passenger pigeons, that number was in the millions. And we got below that threshold and they all died. Other species, you know, it's less. But what's the fewest there can be and it still have some reasonable chance of surviving? And so these population viability analyses are going to take two forms. So we're going to have, you know, how many individuals do I need to ensure that with 95% certainty they're going to survive for 100 years? So that's one possibility, right? And so another possibility is I've got X number of individuals. What's the probability that they can survive for 100 years? And so in this case, we're looking at running buffalo clover. This is a federally endangered plant that grows here in Kentucky. And it used to be fairly common along the bison paths, and now it's pretty rare. It's endangered. But with these population viability analyses, you got to know a lot about the species. And that's sometimes a problem, right? Because we don't always know the demographics of the species and how it all changes and works, right? So changes in sex and age ratios, birth and death rates over time. How's that going to change? How's that going to affect it? We don't know. The environment. How's the environment going to change? How does this species respond? You know, like what is the best, most awesome environment for running buffalo clover? Well, we might not be sure. You know, maybe maybe it's been extirpated from its most awesome environment and we just don't know what that would be. You know, so that's another option. What happens if a big fire comes through, or a hurricane, or some other kind of natural disaster and wipes them out? We didn't account for that in our analysis, right? What if just random genetic drift happens and we lose genes in the population? Didn't account for that. So all these things make it that population viability analyses are not always certain. Okay? So those are some things that increase the odds of a species going extinct, like what factors that increase the, I don't know, I guess that decrease your likelihood for surviving. So we talked about all those. And so now that's all the chapters that are going to be on the midterm exam, chapters 1 through 7. So I'm going to try to develop I will develop, hopefully I'll get it up this week, a review, like a study guide for the midterm exam, stuff to look at that's going to be on there. But in the meantime, what you need to be doing is you need to review the PowerPoints. So look at the PowerPoints, the YouTube videos that we watched. Make sure you review those and watch those again. And read the book, read the chapters and understand the terminology in them. Right, there's a glossary in the back of the book so you can look up the words. You can email me if you have questions about things. So just make sure you understand, if the word's in bold or italics or something like that in the book, it's important. And as far as the format of your exam, it's going to be online. It's not going to be in person, proctored or whatever. You're going to be able to do them from your home online. They're going to be multiple choice, and some true false, some matching, some labeling, fill in the blank, and maybe some short answer questions. But they're mostly going to be multiple choice, matching, and all that. But there'll probably be like one little short essay kind of question on it. Okay, and so I will post the exam by next week, and I'll try to post a review guide for it. And when you take the exam, you'll have one opportunity to take it. So once you start, you got to finish it. I'll make sure to give you adequate time to finish it, but you'll want to make sure that you've got a couple hour block to sit down. It should only take like 45 minutes or so, but just in case, you want to have a good chunk of time set aside in a place with reliable internet. Like my house, for the last month, I've had really crappy internet reception and can't work on any of this stuff from home because every time it rains, my phone and internet go out. It's really frustrating. So if you're in that kind of situation, probably don't want to take your test there, right? But once the test goes up, I'll make an announcement on Blackboard and to let you know the test is live. And likewise, when I post the review guide, I'll let you know for that too. Okay? And again, if you have any questions, feel free to email me.